The ferry cut through Vineyard sound like a knife through memory. I stood at the railing, salt air burning my throat, watching the island rise from the summer haze. I hadn't been back in 3 years. Not since the last argument with my mother. Not since I'd stopped trying to explain why preserving old buildings mattered more to me than developing them into boutique hotels. Now she was gone, and Vanessa had called exactly once. Mom's funeral is Saturday. The lawyer wants us both there Sunday morning. No, I'm sorry. No, I miss you. Just logistics. I should have known then. The house looked smaller than I remembered. White clapboard blue shutters surrounded by wild Rosa rugosa that my mother refused to tame. The gravel driveway crunched under my rental car tires. Vanessa's Range Rover was already there, parked like she owned the place. Maybe she thought she did. I found her on the back porch, barefoot in linen, holding a glass of something clear and cold. She didn't stand when I walked out. "You're late," she said. "The ferry doesn't run on your schedule." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Still so prickly, Claire." I set my bag down and looked past her toward the ocean. The light was golden, slanting through the oak trees the way it only does in late June. Everything smelled like beach roses and low tide. "Where's Ruth?" I asked. "I gave her the weekend off." "You gave her?" "She's been here alone for 2 weeks. I thought she deserved a break." What I heard was, "I wanted us to be alone." Vanessa stood then, crossing the porch in 3 long strides. She was always taller, always more commanding. She touched my shoulder lightly like we were still close. "I know this is hard," she said. "But we need to be practical." That word. Practical. It was the same word she'd used when she suggested Mom sell the house 5 years ago. The same word she'd used when she told me my career was charming but unsustainable. I stepped back. "The lawyer's coming tomorrow at 10, I said. "Let's just get through that first." Her smile tightened. "Of course. But Claire," she paused, swirling her glass. "You should know. I've been managing Mom's affairs for the last year. The bills, the upkeep, everything. She wanted me to." There it was. The first claim. The first stake in the ground. I looked at her carefully. She was already dressed for victory. Linen perfect, hair pulled back. That effortless Vineyard elegance she'd always worn better than I could. "I'm sure we'll hear all about it tomorrow," I said. She laughed softly. "Still so suspicious. Still so sure of yourself." The ocean murmured below us, rhythmic and indifferent. Somewhere a screen door slapped shut. The island always sounded like summer, even when your heart was breaking. I went inside to unpack. My old room was untouched, same faded quilt, same view of the harbor. But someone had been through my mother's bedroom. The closet door was ajar. Boxes were stacked near the dresser, labeled in Vanessa's handwriting. "Donate. Keep. Sell." I stood in the doorway staring. She hadn't waited for me. She hadn't waited for the lawyer. She'd already started. I walked downstairs slowly, my pulse steady but my hands cold. Vanessa was in the kitchen now, pulling ingredients from the fridge like she lived here. "I'm making capris," she said without looking up. "There's wine in the cooler. You're packing up Mom's things." She paused, knife mid-slice through a tomato. "I'm organizing," she said. "There's a difference. We haven't even heard the will yet." She set the knife down and turned to face me. Her expression was patient, almost pitying. "Claire, Mom and I talked about all of this. She knew I'd take care of it. She knew you'd be too." She trailed off, searching for the word. "Too what?" "Sentimental." The word hung in the air between us like smoke. I could have fought her then. Could have screamed. But I'd learned a long time ago that Vanessa didn't respond to emotion. She responded to leverage. So instead I smiled. "You're right," I said. "I probably would be." She blinked surprised. "Let's just wait for Thomas tomorrow," I continued. "He'll walk us through everything." Her shoulders relaxed. She thought she'd won. "Good," she said. "I'm glad you're being reasonable." I poured myself a glass of wine and walked back out to the porch. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of coral and violet. The kind of light that makes everything look like a memory, even while it's happening. I pulled out my phone and texted Thomas Garrett, our family's lawyer. "Is there any way you can come tonight instead of tomorrow morning?" 3 dots appeared. Then, "Is everything all right?" I looked back through the screen door. Vanessa was humming in the kitchen, moving through our mother's house like it was already hers. No, I typed. But it will be. Thomas arrived just after 9, when the sky had turned to indigo and the fireflies were starting to pulse in the tall grass. I met him at the door before Vanessa could. "Thank you for coming," I said quietly. He was exactly as I remembered. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a briefcase that looked older than both of us. He'd handled my parents' legal affairs for 30 years. He knew this family better than most of our relatives did. "Your text concerned me," he said. "My sister's been packing up the house. Before the will." His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "Where is Vanessa?" "Upstairs. She doesn't know you're here yet." He nodded slowly. "Perhaps we should all sit down together." I led him to the living room, the one with the fireplace and the paintings my mother had collected over 40 years of summers. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs a moment later, drawn by the sound of voices. She stopped when she saw Thomas. "Mr. Garrett," she said, recovering quickly. "I didn't know you were coming tonight. Claire asked me to come early." He set his briefcase on the coffee table. "Given the circumstances, I thought it best." Vanessa's smile was tight. "What circumstances?" "Please sit," Thomas said. We did. Vanessa on the sofa, me in the armchair by the window, Thomas between us like a referee. The room smelled like old books and the lavender sachets my mother kept in every drawer. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. "I'll be direct," he said. "Your mother updated her will 4 months ago. She did so without informing either of you, and she asked me to ensure certain conditions were met before the estate could be settled." Vanessa leaned forward. "Conditions?" "She wanted both of you present. Together. She wanted you to hear her wishes at the same time in this house." I felt something cold move through my chest. My mother had known. Somehow she'd known this would happen. Thomas put on his glasses and opened the folder. "The estate," he began, "includes this house, the property it sits on, roughly 2 acres, her investment portfolio, and a few personal items of significant value. The total estimated worth is approximately $4.2 million. Vanessa's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened on her knees. Thomas continued. "Your mother's instructions are specific. The house and property are to be placed in a trust, managed jointly by both daughters, for a period of no less than 5 years. During that time, neither of you may sell, lease, or substantially alter the property without the other's written consent." Silence. Vanessa's voice when it came was very calm. "That's not possible." "It's legally binding," Thomas said. "She told me." Vanessa stopped herself. Her jaw worked. "She told me I could handle everything." "She told you that you could manage her affairs while she was ill," Thomas corrected gently. "That's not the same as inheriting sole control." I didn't say anything. I just watched my sister's face as the reality settled over her like fog. "What about the investments?" she asked. "Split evenly. You'll each receive your portion within 60 days. And the personal items?" Thomas turned a page. "She left a separate list. Some things for each of you. A few items are to be decided between you jointly." Vanessa stood abruptly. She walked to the window, her back to us, her arms crossed. Outside, the ocean was invisible in the dark, but you could hear it. Steady, relentless. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "I'm the one who was here. I'm the one who took care of her." "You visited twice a month," I said quietly. "Ruth was the one who took care of her." Vanessa spun around. "You weren't here at all. Because you told me not to come." Her eyes flashed. "I told you she needed rest, not your guilt." Thomas cleared his throat. "This isn't productive." But Vanessa wasn't finished. She crossed the room until she was standing over me, her face flushed, her voice shaking. "You don't deserve any of this," she said. "You left. You built your little life in Boston and you forgot about her. About us." I looked up at her. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. "I left because you made it clear there was no room for me here. That's not. You told me I was wasting my life. You told me Mom agreed with you. You spent 10 years making me feel like I didn't belong in this family. And now you're angry that she didn't give you everything. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Thomas, as if he could undo what I just said. But he only folded his hands and waited. Finally, Vanessa laughed, a brittle, breathless sound. Fine, she said. Fine. We'll share it. For 5 years. And then I'm buying you out. That's your right, Thomas said. After the trust period ends. She grabbed her phone from the table and walked toward the stairs. I need air. The screen door slammed behind her a moment later. Thomas and I sat in the quiet. She's been telling people the house was hers, I said softly. I suspected as much. She's been making plans. He nodded. Your mother suspected that too. I looked at him. Is that why she changed the will? He hesitated, then reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. She asked me to give you this, he said. Privately. My hands trembled as I took it. I'll let myself out, Thomas said, standing. Call me if you need anything. And Claire. He paused at the door. Your mother was very clear about what she wanted. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I didn't open the letter right away. I sat in the growing dark, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere upstairs a floorboard creaked. Vanessa pacing. Finally I unfolded the paper. Dearest Claire. If you're reading this, then Thomas has done his job and you know the truth. I didn't leave the house to Vanessa alone. I need you to understand why. Your sister loves this place, but she loves the idea of it more than the thing itself. She sees investment. Potential. She would turn it into something profitable and beautiful and utterly soulless. You see it the way I always did, as a living thing. Worth preserving. Worth protecting. I don't expect you two to reconcile. But I do expect you to fight for what matters. Don't let her bully you. Don't let her rewrite history. And don't be afraid to let someone else speak for you when your own voice isn't enough. All my love. Mom. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and roses. Vanessa thought she'd already won. But my mother had given me something better than inheritance. She'd given me permission. I woke to the sound of cabinets closing. The morning light was pale and cool, filtering through the linen curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I heard Vanessa's voice downstairs, low and urgent, and it all came back. I checked my phone. 6:45. I dressed quietly and came down to find her on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, pacing the length of the railing. I understand that, she was saying. But the timeline has changed. No, I can't give you an exact date anymore. Because it's complicated. She saw me through the screen and turned away, lowering her voice. I'll call you back. I poured myself coffee from the pot she'd already made, strong, the way our mother used to make it. The kitchen was spotless. Vanessa always cleaned when she was anxious. She came inside a moment later, her face composed but her eyes tired. Morning, she said. Morning. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, the marble cool under my palms. I want to talk, she said. Calmly. I waited. She took a breath. I know last night was heated, but we're adults. We can figure this out. Figure what out? A solution. One that works for both of us. She leaned against the counter, her posture deliberately casual. You don't actually want to manage this place, Claire. You have your own life. Your work. I can do both. Can you? She tilted her head. Be honest. When was the last time you took a real vacation? You're restoring a church in Salem. You've got that museum project in Portsmouth. You're overextended. She wasn't wrong. But she also wasn't right. What are you proposing? I asked. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She thought she had an opening. Let me buy you out now. Before the trust period. I'll pay you fair market value for your half. Thomas can appraise it, everything above board. You take the money, invest it however you want, and you're free. No joint decisions, no conflict. Mom specifically structured it so we couldn't do that. Mom structured it before she understood how complicated things had gotten. I set my coffee down. What things? Vanessa hesitated. Just for a second. But I saw it. The upkeep, she said. The taxes. The repairs. This house needs work, Claire. Real work. And I've been covering it. You said you were managing her affairs. I was. I am. But that doesn't mean it's been easy. She pushed off the counter and opened a drawer, pulling out a folder. Look. I have receipts. New roof last summer, $32,000. HVAC replacement in April, $18,000. Painting, landscaping, pest control. It adds up. She spread the papers across the island like evidence. I looked at them. They were real, invoices from local contractors, all dated within the last 14 months. All paid from an account in Vanessa's name. Why didn't Mom pay for these? I asked. She did. I was just the one managing it. From your account? It was easier. She reimbursed me. I picked up one of the invoices, studied it. This is from October, I said. Mom died in May. Vanessa's expression didn't change. She was already sick by then. I was handling everything. And this one, February, for landscape design. The gardens needed updating. Mom loved those gardens exactly as they were. Vanessa sighed, the sound etched with frustration. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You romanticize everything. The house needed maintenance. I provided it. That's not a crime. I set the invoice down carefully. How much do you think I owe you? I'm not asking you to pay me back. I'm offering you a way out. That's not what I asked. She crossed her arms. The morning light caught the fine lines around her eyes. Stress or sleeplessness or something else. Roughly 90,000. She said finally. Over the last 2 years. It was a staggering amount. But something about the way she said it, too precise, too ready, made my chest tighten. I'd like to see the account statements, I said. Excuse me. The reimbursements. From Mom. You said she paid you back. Vanessa's jaw tensed. I don't have to prove anything to you. If we're co-trustees, actually you do. For a long moment we just looked at each other. Outside a gull cried. The wind chimes on the porch rang softly. I was taking care of her, Vanessa said quietly. While you were in Boston living your life, I was here. Making sure she was comfortable. Making sure this place didn't fall apart. I know. Do you? Her voice cracked just slightly. Do you have any idea what it was like? Watching her forget things. Watching her fade. Something in me softened. 'Cause I didn't know. Not really. But then she kept talking. I earned this house, Claire. I earned it by being here. By showing up. And I'm not going to let you walk in after 3 years and act like we're equals. The softness vanished. We are equals, I said. Legally. That's what the will says. The will is a mistake. Or maybe it's the first honest thing Mom did in years. Vanessa stepped back like I'd slapped her. What is that supposed to mean? I picked up the invoices, tapping them into a neat stack. It means I'm going to call Thomas. And I'm going to ask him to review every transaction you made on Mom's behalf. You don't trust me. You just tried to buy me out of something Mom explicitly said we had to share. So no, I don't. Her face went very still. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. You're going to regret this. Maybe. I'm serious, Claire. You think you can come back here and play guardian of Mom's legacy? You have no idea what you're doing. Then I'll learn. She grabbed her keys from the counter, her movements sharp and deliberate. I'm going out, she said. When I get back, I expect you to have thought about this more carefully. Where are you going? She didn't answer. The door slammed behind her, and a moment later the Range Rover roared to life. I stood alone in the kitchen, my heart pounding. Then I pulled out my phone and called Thomas. He answered on the second ring. Claire, is everything all right? I need you to do something for me, I said. I need you to pull every financial record related to my mother's estate for the last 3 years. Especially anything Vanessa had access to. There was a pause. You think there's a problem? I think my sister just tried very hard to convince me to walk away. And I want to know why. I'll start today, he said. It may take a few days. That's fine. Just be thorough. I always am. I hung up and walked out onto the porch. The ocean was calm, glittering under the late morning sun. A sailboat drifted past, white and silent. Everything looked postcard perfect. But I could feel it now, the wrongness underneath. Vanessa had been so certain. So ready with numbers, with arguments, with that folder of receipts. Like she'd been preparing for this conversation for months. I thought about my mother's letter. Don't let her rewrite history. What history had Vanessa already rewritten? And what would I find when I started asking questions? Ruth came back on Wednesday. I was on the porch, sorting through boxes of my mother's books, when I heard the familiar sound of her old Volvo in the driveway. She emerged slowly, a canvas bag over her shoulder, her white hair pulled back in the same bun she'd worn for 30 years. She saw me and stopped. "Claire," she said. Her voice was soft, surprised. "I didn't know you were here. Vanessa didn't tell you?" Something flickered across her face. "No." I came down the steps and hugged her. She smelled like soap and sea air and something else. Something that reminded me of childhood summers, of safety. "I'm so sorry about your mother," she said when we pulled apart. She was a remarkable woman. Thank you for taking care of her." Ruth's eyes grew bright, but she blinked it away. "It was my honor." We went inside together. I made tea while she set her bag down and looked around the kitchen, her gaze lingering on small things. The vase of hydrangeas I'd picked that morning, the stack of mail on the counter. "Where's Vanessa?" she asked. "Boston. She left yesterday. Said she had meetings." Ruth nodded slowly, but she didn't look surprised. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd eaten countless breakfasts as a child. Sun streamed through the window, catching dust motes in the air. "Ruth," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did Vanessa tell you she was giving you the weekend off?" "When I arrived." Ruth's hand stilled on her teacup. "No. She told me your mother's estate was being settled and that I should take some time," she said. "She said you might not be coming." The air seemed to thin. "She told me you needed a break," I said. "I see." Ruth's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "What was it really like?" I asked. "The last few months. With Mom." Ruth looked down at her tea, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she set the cup down carefully and folded her hands. "Your mother was ill," she said. "But she wasn't diminished. Not the way Vanessa suggested." "What do you mean?" "Vanessa told people your mother couldn't make decisions anymore. That she needed help with everything. But that wasn't true. Your mother was clear-headed until the very end. Tired, yes. In pain, yes. But she knew exactly what she wanted." My chest tightened. "Did she talk about the house?" "Every day." Ruth's eyes met mine. "She was worried Vanessa would sell it. She made me promise to tell you something if you ever came back." "What?" Ruth reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, the kind my mother always kept by her bedside. She slid it across the table. "She wanted you to have this." I opened it with shaking hands. The pages were filled with my mother's handwriting. Notes, dates, observations. I flipped through slowly, my heart pounding. March 12th, he says the roof needs replacing. I told her to wait until spring. She hired someone anyway. April 3rd, bill from landscaping company. I never authorized this work. V says it was a surprise. $8,000. April 29th, V wants me to sign papers. Says it's for estate planning. I told her I already have a will. She seemed angry. May 2nd, called Thomas. Asked him to review everything V has done. I don't trust her judgment anymore. Page after page. A record of my sister slowly taking control. I looked up at Ruth, my throat tight. Why didn't she stop her? She tried. Ruth's voice was gentle. But Vanessa was persuasive. She'd tell your mother it was too complicated, that she shouldn't worry, that she was handling everything. And your mother was so tired, Claire. Sometimes it was easier to just let her. But she knew. She knew. Ruth reached across the table and touched my hand. That's why she changed her will. That's why she wanted you both to share the house. She hoped it would force Vanessa to slow down, to remember what this place actually meant. I closed the notebook carefully, my hands trembling. "Thank you," I whispered. Ruth squeezed my hand once, then stood. "I should unpack." "But Claire," she paused at the doorway. "Your mother loved both of you. She just understood that you loved this house the way she did." And she was afraid Vanessa would turn it into something else. After she left, I sat alone with the notebook reading every page. My mother had documented everything. Every invoice Vanessa had inflated. Every decision she'd made without permission. Every time she dismissed my mother's wishes as confusion or sentimentality. It wasn't fraud exactly, but it was close. And it was enough. Thomas called that evening. "I've been through the records," he said. His voice was carefully neutral. "There are discrepancies." "What kind?" "Vanessa paid for legitimate work. But several of the invoices appear to be significantly higher than market rate. And there are charges for services your mother explicitly declined in writing." "How much?" "Roughly $40,000 over 2 years. Possibly more, depending on how we categorize certain expenses." I closed my eyes. "Can we prove it?" "With your mother's notebook and the financial records, yes. Vanessa didn't commit fraud, but she did exceed her authority as power of attorney. A court would likely require her to reimburse the estate. What if she says Mom approved everything? Then we show the notebook. And we put Ruth on the stand." I thought about Vanessa's face when she'd shown me those invoices. The confidence. The certainty. She thought I'd never question her. "What do you recommend?" I asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I recommend you talk to your sister first. Give her a chance to make this right before it becomes legal. And if she refuses, then we proceed." "But Claire," he paused, "this will end your relationship with her. You need to be sure." I looked out at the ocean, dark now, the waves invisible but constant. "I'm sure," I said. Vanessa came back Friday morning. I was ready. I'd set the notebook on the kitchen table, along with a folder Thomas had prepared. Financial summaries. Discrepancy reports. A letter outlining options for restitution. She walked in with coffees and pastries like we were going to have a pleasant sister breakfast. Her smile faded when she saw the table. "What's this?" she asked. "Sit down." "Claire." "Sit down." She did slowly, her eyes moving from the notebook to the folder and back to my face. "Mom kept records," I said quietly, "of everything you did. Every invoice, every decision, every time you overrode her wishes." Vanessa's face went pale. "I was helping her." "You were helping yourself." I opened the folder. $40,000, Vanessa. That's how much you overcharged the estate. Maybe more. "That's not." She stopped, her jaw working. "Those were legitimate expenses. At inflated rates. For work she didn't authorize." She was confused. I slid the notebook across the table. "Read it." She didn't touch it. She just stared at my mother's handwriting, visible on the open page. "V is trying to control everything. I won't let her." Vanessa stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said. Her voice shook. "I spent 2 years taking care of her. 2 years putting my life on hold. And you're going to accuse me of stealing? I'm giving you a chance to make it right." "There's nothing to make right." "Then we'll let a judge decide." She stared at me, her face flushed, her hands balled into fists. "You self-righteous." She bit off the word. "You think you're so noble. But you weren't here, Claire. You don't get to walk in now and play hero." "I'm not playing anything. I'm protecting what Mom wanted. Mom wanted me to have this house. Then why didn't she give it to you?" The question hung in the air like thunder. Vanessa's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "She didn't trust you," I said quietly. "And now I know why." For a moment I thought she might cry. Her eyes were bright, her breathing ragged. But then something hardened in her face. "Fine," she said. "Keep the house. Keep all of it. I'm done." She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. "Vanessa." She stopped, her back to me. "Thomas will contact you about the reimbursement," I said. "You have 30 days. She laughed. A broken, bitter sound. "You really think this is justice?" she asked. "I think it's what Mom wanted." She turned then, and the look on her face was pure devastation. "She loved me," Vanessa whispered. "She did." "I know. Then how can you do this?" I met her eyes. "Because she loved this house more." Vanessa left without another word. I stood in the empty kitchen, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. Outside, the ocean rolled on, indifferent and eternal. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The house was quiet after she left. I spent the afternoon on the Widow's Walk, the small rooftop platform my mother used to retreat to when she needed perspective. From up there you could see the whole island, the harbor, the lighthouse, the ribbon of beach that curved toward Edgartown. The wind was strong, carrying the scent of salt and wild roses. I thought about my mother sitting up here, watching the same view, making the same impossible calculations. Love divided by duty. Family weighed against truth. She must have known what the will would do to us. She did it anyway. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Vanessa's lawyer just called. She's agreed to the repayment plan. First installment in 2 weeks. I read it twice, waiting to feel something. Victory, maybe. Vindication. Instead, I just felt tired. Ruth found me there an hour later, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. Thought you might need this, she said. We sat side by side on the weathered bench, watching the sailboats tack across the sound. She left, I said. Ruth nodded. I saw. Did she say anything to you? No. But she took the photo from the mantel. The one of her and your mother from the summer she turned 16. I remembered that photo. Vanessa in a sundress, our mother's arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing. It had been taken right here on this property, during the last summer before everything got complicated. Before Vanessa started needing to prove herself. Before I started running away. I didn't want this, I said quietly. I know. I just wanted her to be honest. Ruth sipped her tea, her eyes on the horizon. Your sister spent her whole life trying to earn something your mother was always going to give her freely. She just couldn't see it. And now she thinks I took it from her. Maybe. Ruth turned to look at me. Or maybe eventually, she'll understand that you saved her from herself. I wanted to believe that. But I'd seen Vanessa's face when she left. That wasn't someone on the edge of understanding. That was someone who just lost everything. The days that followed were strange, peaceful and hollow at once. I worked on the house. Small things mostly. Fixed the screen door that had been sticking. Repainted the porch railing. Weeded the garden beds my mother had planted 30 years ago. Ruth worked beside me, quiet and steady. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Thomas called twice with updates. Vanessa had hired a lawyer, but not to fight, just to structure the repayment. She'd also formally resigned as co-trustee, which meant I'd have full control going forward. She wants to be done with this, Thomas said. Completely. I understand. Do you want me to try to mediate? There might still be a way to. No, I said. Let her go. Because I knew my sister. If I reached out now, she'd see it as pity. Or worse, as gloating. She needed space. And maybe so did I. On the 10th day I got a letter. Not an email. Not a text. An actual letter, postmarked from Boston. Addressed in Vanessa's precise handwriting. I opened it standing in the kitchen, my heart in my throat. Claire. I've been trying to write this for a week. I don't know if I'll actually send it. You were right. About the invoices, about the control, about all of it. I told myself I was protecting Mom's legacy, but really I was just trying to prove I deserved to inherit it. Like love was something you earned instead of something you just had. I'm angry. At you, at Mom, at myself. I don't know if that will ever go away. But I also know you didn't do this to hurt me. You did it because it was right. And because Mom asked you to. I can't be around the house right now. Maybe not for a long time. But I'm not going to fight you anymore. Take care of it. You always loved it more honestly than I did anyway. V. I read it 3 times, standing in the same spot, the paper trembling in my hands. It wasn't an apology. Not quite. But it was something. A door left open, just a crack. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and my mother's notebook. I'd read it so many times I practically had it memorized. But tonight, I turned to the last entry, the one dated 2 days before she died. The girls will fight. I know they will. But maybe fighting is what they need. Maybe it's the only way they'll finally tell each other the truth. I'm leaving them both the house because I want them to have something worth fighting for. Worth protecting. I just hope they remember it's not the house that matters. It's what they choose to do with it. I closed the notebook and looked out at the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of peach and gold. The kind of light that made everything feel possible, even forgiveness. I thought about Vanessa, alone in Boston, carrying her anger like armor. I thought about my mother, sitting in this exact spot, loving us both imperfectly but completely. And I thought about the house, this beautiful, stubborn, salt-weathered place that had witnessed every version of our family. It wasn't perfect. Neither were we. But it was ours. And maybe that was enough. 3 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. Claire. The voice was hesitant. Vanessa's. Hi, I said. Silence. Then, I sent the first payment. I know. Thomas told me. Thank you. More silence. I could hear traffic in the background. The distant wail of a siren. How's the house? She asked finally. Good. I fixed the porch railing. And the gardens are coming back. Mom would like that. Yeah, she would. A long pause. Then Vanessa's voice very quiet. I'm not ready to come back yet. I know. But maybe, eventually. The door's always open, I said. And I meant it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, okay. We hung up. I stood on the porch, phone in hand, watching the light change over the water. It wasn't closure. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a beginning. And sometimes that's what justice looks like. Not revenge. Not victory. Just two people, standing in the wreckage of their expectations, deciding to leave a door unlocked. I stayed on the island through September. Worked remotely when I could. Let some projects go. Learned to live at a different pace. Ruth taught me how to make my mother's clam chowder. I taught myself how to paint shutters without making a mess. Together we sorted through 30 years of accumulated life. Photographs, letters, books, all the beautiful debris of a life fully lived. I didn't think about Vanessa every day. But when I did, it hurt a little less. By October, the tourists were gone and the island turned quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear yourself think. I was sitting on the porch one afternoon when Thomas stopped by unannounced. I was in the neighborhood, he said, though we both knew that wasn't true. I poured him coffee and we sat together, watching the marsh grass turn gold in the autumn light. I have something for you, he said eventually. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. From your mother's safety deposit box. She left instructions that you should receive it once the estate was settled. Inside was a deed. Not to the house. To the 2 acres it sat on. Made out in my name only. I looked up at Thomas, confused. The house is jointly held in trust, he explained. But the land was always going to be yours. She set it up years ago, long before she got sick. Why? He smiled. She said you were the only one who understood that the land wasn't something you could own. Just something you were allowed to protect for a while. Tears blurred my vision. My mother had known. All along she'd known. She wanted you to have roots, Thomas said quietly. Even if you didn't realize you were looking for them. That night I called Vanessa. She answered on the 4th ring, surprised. I wanted to tell you something, I said. About the estate. I heard her inhale. Bracing for another fight. The land is mine, I said. Mom set it up that way years ago. But the house, the actual structure, that's still ours. Together. For as long as the trust lasts. Silence. I don't understand, she said finally. I think she was trying to tell us something. That we can't have this place without each other. The land needs the house. The house needs the land. It doesn't work if we divide it. Claire. You don't have to come back, I said quickly. Not yet. Not until you're ready. But when you do, you'll still have a place here. I promise. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Steady. Measured. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because Mom was right. It's not about the house. It never was. Another long pause. Then quietly. Thank you. We hung up. And this time it felt different. Like something finished and something else beginning. That was the summer I finally understood what real justice feels like. Not like triumph. Not like revenge. Like the tide coming in slow, inevitable, restoring the shape of things to what they were always meant to be. My sister and I aren't close. Maybe we never will be. But we're not enemies either. We're just two women who love the same person, the same place in different ways. And we're learning slowly, painfully, that love doesn't have to be divided to be real. The house still stands on its small point of land, weathered and beautiful. The roses still bloom wild every June. And the door is still unlocked. Just in case. What did you think of my story? Leave your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. And don't miss the next story, because next time, when a family barbecue becomes the stage for a sister's cruelty, Claire decides it's time to let the truth speak louder than blood. Sometimes the best guest list includes a witness,